Hi everybody, I'm Ryan, and today we're going to look at Dimir Midrange. We're going to look at the deck tech of it and card choices in the deck. We're going to look at the overall strategy. We're going to look at how to sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks in Standard. We're going to look at different builds and flex slots and cards you can play in all those different builds, and nuances and interesting play patterns that you might not recognize when you first pick up the deck. So, here you go. So this is a pretty stock Dimir mid-range list. Now what this deck is basically attempting to do is remove your opponent's creatures with these black removal spells, attack with these really cheap, hard to block creatures, tap down creatures so that you can keep attacking, counterspell the important stuff, and then capitalize on these really cheap, sometimes flash creatures and being able to get blockers out of the way with Enduring Curiosity and Kaido. So let's go by mana costs and talk about these cards. So we're playing Dimir lands, obviously, with Restless Reef and Soulstone Sanctuary. Both of them are decent man lands. There's not a ton of synergy as far as like the mill thing with Restless Reef or anything, but they're just powerful man lands to continue that attacking because we're a tempo deck. Our cards are not super powerful, but we can be significantly more mana efficient. Playing Spygrass Siren is a 1-mana 1/1. When it enters, create a map token. So we can capitalize on the map, and when we return it to our hand with something like Kaido, then we can replay it and keep capitalizing on the map. It's hard to block, so it capitalizes on Enduring Curiosity as well. And then we have Cut Down, mostly for aggressive decks and kind of the mirror match to be able to take out those small creatures. Playing Fairy Mastermind, it's a 2-mana 2/1 with Flash Flying. Whenever opponent draws their second card, each turn you draw a card, and you can pay 4 mana to have each player draw a card. So obviously the ability capitalizes on itself, but this is also excellent against the Unholy Annex. Like it's so good against that. It's really good in the mirror match, you know, to counter Enduring Curiosity. It's even better in multiples because each individual Fairy Mastermind has its own trigger, and it's hard to block, and it has flash, so it plays at instant speed very well. Something else that has flash is Floodpit's Drowner, is a 2-mana 2/1 with flash and vigilance. When it enters, tap target creature and opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. And you can pay 2 mana and tap it and shuffle Floodpit's Drowner and target creature with a stun counter into their owner's libraries. So it is a way to deal with an opponent's creature. It costs 4 mana total, so that's pretty tough. It's a way to stop things from attacking so much, and it's a way to get things out of the way to continue to attack, and it has vigilance in and of itself. So it can attack and then also still activate the ability, which is very strong. And its main job is to get things out of the way, even if it's not evasive. Playing Spell Stutter, a 2-mana counter-target spell, and this controller pays 2, plus an additional 1 for each fairy you control. And we only have 1 fairy in our deck and Fairy Mastermind. So it's kind of like a mana leak sometimes. Anoint with Affliction, exile target creature, mana value 3 or less, or if the corrupted thing doesn't matter, it's just a 3 or less thing. Just solid removal spell, especially something that doesn't trigger Heartfire Hero and whatever. Go for the Throat, just pretty unconditional removal. And then Shieldred's Edict is a way to cleanly deal with like Planeswalkers and whatnot. We're playing 1 Fabloom Trick as a 3-mana instant, create 2 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens with flying, which, by the way, combos with Spell Stutter. When you do, tap target creature and opponent controls, so you're able to tap things down, so you keep attacking. Also creates these fairies to be able to have these evasive threats. Tishana's Timebiter is a 3-mana 3/2 with flash, so it plays at instant speed really well, which this deck already wants to do. Counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability. If the ability of an artifact, creature, or planeswalker is countered this way, that permanent lose all abilities for as long as Tishana's Tidebiter remains on the battlefield. So a great way to counter more things on the stack, just not necessarily spells. And again, plays at instant speed and is a good creature on its own. And then here are the 2 big payoffs, Enduring Curiosity and Kaido. Enduring Curiosity is a 4-mana 4/3 with flash. Again, flash, instant speed. Awesome. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. When Enduring Curiosity dies, if it was a creature, return to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment. So this is really good alongside all these evasive threats and these things that get rid of blockers, whether they be removal spells or Floodpit's Drowner or Flavrum Trick that tap things down. Evasiveness like Spygrass Siren and Fairy Mastermind. Hitting your opponent, even with really small creatures, allows you to draw more cards and be able to just have a fistful of either removal spells or more creatures to drive in more cards or blockers or things like that to interrupt what your opponent's doing is so good. And Enduring Curiosity is very hard to answer because one of the best block removals for the Enduring cards is Anoint with Affliction, doesn't hit Enduring Curiosity, and it'll come back and just be an enchantment that like Biden of Thassa. And then Kaido, which is a 4-mana planeswalker that starts at 4 loyalty. And it has ninjutsu, which means if there's an unblocked creature, you can return that creature to your hand, and Kaido enters tapped and attacking, and it has hexproof during your turn. And he's a 3/4 ninja. So you're able to do that, but that already combos with things. Already that's a pretty powerful thing. You can get him out on turn 3 by ninjutsuing Kaido, but also you can capitalize on these enter the battlefield effects again by returning Spygrass Siren. You can get another map when you replay it. You can get another Tishana's Tideminder trigger off of it. You can get another Floodpit Strata trigger off of it. It is just very, very good. And then its abilities are very good as well. You know, the emblem and ninjas you control get +1/+1, which means it gives itself +1/+1. 0 Surveil 2, then draw a card for each opponent who lost life this turn, which kind of already happens because you're attacking so much and you have evasiveness and getting things out of the way, like we've already talked about. And then it's -2 tap target creature, put 2 stun counters on it, which works with the strategy of the rest of the deck, especially good against Archfiend of the Dross, because it means they're not killing you with Archfiend of the Dross, which means they might die to Archfiend of the Dross. So that's the overall strategy of the main deck. As far as the sideboard goes, we're playing 2 Negate to tackle these non-creature spells, another Tishana's Tidebinder for really scary things. I'm thinking like Atraxa and whatever. The 4th Cut Down to be able to deal with those aggro decks of small creatures. Duress for non-creature spells. Preacher of the Schism as a 4/of kind of changes the tone of the deck. It lets us be a little bit more mid-range where we need to be. And kind of it's almost like we shift into a mid-range deck if we know our primary strategy isn't going to work. 2 Shieldred the Apocalypse also helps with that mid-range transformational sideboard. Gix's Command, very good against these aggressive decks. And Ghost Vacuum is our graveyard hate. So this is the Dimir mid-range deck, and before we get into how to sideboard, let's talk about the actual sideboard cards and what the rules are. Negate fights against non-creature spells, obviously. Tishana's Tidebinder is to attack these cards that have triggers, obviously, and good against decks that we want to play instant speed at. Cut Down for these aggressive decks. Duress for these control and decks that have a lot of targets. Preacher of the Schism when we want to do a little transformative thing where we turn into like a more focused mid-range deck rather than doing tempo stuff. Same thing for Shieldred. Gix's Command is mostly for aggressive decks, being able to give lifelink and kind of turn the corner. And then Ghost Vacuum is our graveyard hate. So the most popular deck in Standard is the Mirror Match. In the Mirror Match, we're bringing in Cut Down because it hits a lot of the targets. We're bringing in Tishana's Tidebinder because able to hit like an Enduring Curiosity or a Fairy Mastermind trigger is really solid. We're bringing in Shieldred just in case we fall behind in the draw cards portion. We can push through that little extra damage. And we're going to be bringing out Anoint with Affliction. Yes, it deals with these creatures, but for 1 more mana than Cut Down and doesn't deal with Enduring Curiosity or Kaido, which is what really, really matters. And we're going to be siding out of our Spell Stutter. Everything costs so little that it's reasonably easy to play around. And so I sideboard in the Mirror Match. The second most popular deck, is Golgari Midrange. Against Golgari, again, we're a fan of Tishana's Tidebinder, being able to hit Shieldred or Preacher or Glissa, or there's so many things. I'm also a fan of doing a little bit of that transformative thing, bringing in Preachers and Shieldred to be able to keep up with their midrange plan. Cut Down is really bad. It deals with Dread Knight. It can hit Llanowar Elves, which is kind of nice, but Feyboom Trick kind of doesn't matter because they don't have many flyers anyway. And then we're going to shave on Floodpit Strata because we really just want to outcard them with Enduring Curiosity and like hit them in the air and nickel and dime them. And these creatures are kind of just better in keeping up with the mid-range plan than Floodpit Strata. So I sideboard against Golgari mid. The third most popular deck is the Gruul Prowess, Gruul Aggro deck, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, we're bringing in the Cut Downs, we're bringing in the Shieldreds, we're bringing in Preacher of the Schisms. Just because it's an awesome blocker, we're bringing in Gift Command. Tishana's Tidebinder, not good. Feyboom Trick is just not good. I also think we need to cut Kaidos against this deck because we're not going to be like attacking and want to like remove a blocker for us very often. Then Counter Magic is historically pretty bad against aggressive decks, so that's how I sideboard against Gruul Prowess. The fourth most popular deck is Mono Red Prowess. We're going to sideboard the same as we did with Gruul Prowess. Okay, bye. And also the same with Boros Burn, which is the 10th most popular deck. I'll mention that when we get there. The Jeskai Convoke deck is the 5th most popular deck. Against Jeskai Convoke, I am a fan of Cut Down. I'm a fan of Tishana's Tidebinder. It stops Sheltered by Ghosts. It stops Night Errant. It stops Imidane's Recruiter triggers. Gix's Command is awesome as well as a board wipe. But we also have cards on our main deck that are kind of just bad. So for example, Floodpit Strata, don't really care about that card. They have way too many blockers. There aren't many key individual cards that we want to make sure we get rid of. Also, I'm not a big fan of Shieldred's Edict for kind of similar reasons. And similarly, because they're an aggressive deck, I like cutting Kaido, which gives us room to bring in all of these mid-range hate cards. And it's this sideboard against Jeskai Convoke. The sixth most popular deck is the Domain Zur Overlords deck. Against this deck, we're bringing in Negate, being able to hit things like Leyline Binding or, you know, Get Lost or Sunfall, all very important. Also, Tishana's Timebinder is pretty excellent, being able to turn off all of those triggers and Zur activations. Similarly, also a fan of Duress. And then we're cutting the cut downs and the Anoint with Affliction. Anoint with Affliction only hits Zur exclusively. And really, our main strategy is very good against Domain already. So that's how I sideboard against Domain. The seventh most popular deck is Mono White Tokens, the Mono White control deck. Bringing in Negates because it's mostly non-creature spells. Bringing in Tishana's Tidebinder, good against Enduring Innocence, Beza, Overlord, the Planeswalker, Elspeth, all very good. Duress as well. And I don't have a lot of flyers, so our primary game plan is actually pretty decent. So we're going to bring out our cut downs, only really deals with a token here or there, and Anoint with Affliction. And so I sideboard against Mono White Tokens. The eighth most popular deck is the Temur Floodcaller combo. Against the Temur Floodcaller deck, we kind of just need to stop what they're doing. So Duress and Negate are great. Same thing with Tishana's Tidebinder. I don't think we can afford to play Cut Down because so many things can get so much bigger over time. I think it gets stuck in your hand like a lot. I'm not a big fan of Flayboom Trick, and we're going to shave up Flood Pit's Drowner, and that's how I sideboard against the Floodcaller combo. The ninth most popular deck is the Azorius Convoke deck / Azorius Flash / Enduring Curiosity Steel Seraph goodies. And we're going to sideboard really similar to the way we did with the other deck. Except I do like the counter magic a little bit more against this deck because they have big payoffs like Steel Seraph and Enduring Curiosity and Regal Bunicorn and things like that. And so we're just going to shave the Kaidos for a Tidebinder and Gix Command, and that's how we sideboard against Azorius Convoke. I think they're a slightly worse Convoke deck, and we can play on our axis a little bit more than against the Jeskai Convoke. And since we've already talked about the 10th most popular deck, which is Boros Burn, that's how you sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks.
These are the non-flex slots in Dimir Midrange. These are the cards that you pretty much have to play when you're playing the deck. This is stock. This is the base of the deck. It's these 48 cards in the main deck and these 5 cards in the sideboard. We're not going to analyze these, but we are going to analyze the 12 cards you need to select for the main deck and the 10 cards you need to select for the sideboard to make your own Dimir Midrange deck. And these are those cards. You're going to select 12 of these 25 cards for the main deck and 10 of these 15 cards for the sideboard. These are your options. These are your flex slots. So let's talk about these. First off, you're going to select 2 lands to play to get up to 25 land because there's 23 lands that are totally stock. You're going to be playing the 3rd Restless Reef, the 3rd Soul Sanctuary, or a single Swamp. Now, the Restless Reef gives good mana, but entering tapped is definitely a problem, and having a man land is really nice. Soul Sanctuary is really cool because it has vigilance. It stays a creature when you activate it, and it enters untapped. The issue is you have worse mana, obviously. And then the Swamp is slightly worse mana. It's kind of in the middle as far as the mana color issues go, but it enters untapped, which is pretty solid. So you're going to select 2 of these lands to play, and then 10 of these other cards. And let's go over these other cards. So option of playing up to 2 Phantom Interference. It is a 1 blue with Spree, so you can pay an additional 3 to create a 2/2 white spirit creature token with flying. You can pay an additional 1 to counter target spell unless controller pays 2. So it's a slightly worse mana leak with a little bit of extra upside. Having the sheep counter magic to protect your creatures and to defend against powerful spells that your opponent is playing is pretty strong. You can play the 4th Cut Down if you're worried about aggressive decks or the mirror match kinda. You can play up to 2 Saiba Cryptomancer if you are worried about removal spells. Also plays really well with like Kaido and stuff. You can play up to 2 Spellstutter for a slightly better counterspell than Phantom Interference, but doesn't have the upside of being able to create a 2/2. You can play a 2nd Anoint with Affliction, very good against things like Mosswood Dread Knight, is a cheap-ish answer to aggressive strategies, really good against Enduring Innocence, etc., etc. You can play the 4th Go for the Throat, just as a reasonably unconditional removal. You can play a Nowhere to Run. Nowhere to Run is really cool against like ward abilities, also pretty solid against hexproof strategies. Also, again, just like a really cheap removal spell that removes a lot of different things. You can play 1 Shieldred's Edict as a pretty unconditional removal for Planeswalkers. I think that's really the only reason you would play this card. You can play up to 2 Fabloom Trick to get more things out of the way. Also creates more creatures to capitalize on that Enduring Curiosity stuff. You can play up to 2 Tishana's Tidebinder if you're worried about like Atraxas or Leyline Bindings or want to turn off an opponent's Enduring Innocence or things like that. Play up to 2 Preacher of the Schism to slant a little bit more towards that mid-range strategy. You can play the 4th Enduring Innocence to really lean into that tempo plan where you're just dealing a bunch of damage and getting a ton of cards in your hand. 1 Shieldred, very good against aggressive decks and mid-range decks alike. Again, just kind of slants towards the mid-range plan rather than tempo plans, similar to Preacher of the Schism. You can play the 4th Kaido to capitalize on returning these cards to your hand, especially cards with Enter the Battlefield effect like Tishana's Tidebinder or Cyber Cryptomancer or the cards we already have in our non-flex slots. And you can play up to 2 Mockingbird, which is really solid alongside something like Enduring Innocence or Tishana's Tidebinder, or really just to create a cheap aggressive creature that you can return with Kaido or draw cards with Enduring Curiosity. So you're going to select 12 of these 25 cards, 2 of them being one of the 3 lands, to add to these non-flex slots, and then you have your own customized main deck. As far as the sideboard goes, you're going to select 10 of these 15 cards. We've already talked about Flavum Trick, Tishana's Tidebinder, and Cutdown. Disfigure is a really interesting card that mostly against the aggressive decks, it gets around some of the pump spells, getting out of range of Cutdown. It's kind of a different approach to removal against these aggressive decks. Play up to 2 Duress for control decks, for domain, things like that. We've already talked about Anoint with Affliction. You can play up to 2 Blot Out, being very good because it exiles. It's one of our only really clean answers to Enduring Curiosity, which is, you know, for the mirror match and stuff. You can play a Malicious Eclipse. A 3-mana, all creatures get -2/-2, and they get exiled. Very good against the token strategies and Convoke. Also like solid against mono red as well. We've already talked about Shieldred, but you can play up to 2 Shieldred just to, again, slant more towards that mid-range plan post-board. Also very good against the aggressive decks. You can play a 2nd Gix Command. Now, Gix Command I found is only really, really good against aggressive strategies, but in a deck like this where you can return a lot of creatures with power 2 or less, you have a lot of cards that with power 2 or less. It's solid against like control and mid-range as well. And Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate. So you're going to select 10 of these 15 cards to join your non-flex slots, and then you have your own customized but stock Dimir mid-range list. We're going to start with simple and then get a little bit harder. One of the simple nuances is leave Fairy Mastermind up and have access to Fairy Mastermind against decks that draw cards. Fairy Mastermind isn't a great card if it's not drawing cards for you, either with Enduring Curiosity or literally off of your opponent's draws, and being able to surprise them can win you games, whether it's the mirror match or against the Up the Beanstalk decks. That being said, the multiple Fairy Masterminds trigger multiple times. And so if you have 2 Fairy Masterminds, your opponent draws their 2nd card for their turn, you can draw 2 cards. And what may be less obvious is if you activate Fairy Mastermind, it makes you both draw a card, but if that's the 2nd card your opponent has drawn, now you have 2 triggers. So you have drawn 3 cards, your opponent has only drawn 1 off of 1 Fairy Mastermind activation if you have multiple, and obviously there's more if you have more. Something to remember, though, is if you happen to have an insane amount of mana, Fairy Mastermind isn't for extra cards drawn. Fairy Mastermind literally only cares about the 2nd card drawn of your opponents. So multiple activations effectively do nothing other than help you dig, but also lets your opponent draw cards too. When you ninjutsu Kaido onto the battlefield, doing it on things that have enter the battlefield effects is the best way to go about it. Because you can put that thing with enter the battlefield effects back in your hand and get that enter the battlefield effect again. So whether it be Tishana's Tidebinder, so you can counter another activated ability, Flood Pit's Drowner for be able to tap something down, Spyglass Siren, all that stuff. You don't always have to do things with enter the battlefield effects, but things with enter the battlefield effects is almost always better because it just gets you more value. And then the last tiny nuance that's important is surprising your opponent with flash cards is a really important aspect of this deck. Now, whether it be flashing in a Fairy Mastermind on end step, untapping, attacking, and then casting Enduring Curiosity, or just making an attack and seeing if they block, and if they don't, flashing an Enduring Curiosity, making them surprised
all the time is super important, especially since this deck has a uncanny ability to put a bunch of power onto the battlefield at the beginning of your opponent's end step, tap down some creatures, remove some creatures, untap, play Enduring Curiosity, and draw a ton of cards. It's just disgusting. It's so good, but you have to make sure you're doing that. If you liked this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.